Jimmy had never run so fast his entire life. It wasn't his idea to go to the Harker house, which by now was near in total collapse. It was Leo's. He and Jimmy had both been inside its rotten shell more than a handful of times, the scare factor long since gone. But, as it wasn't much of a town, with nothing much to do, kicking around a decrepit, supposedly haunted house was all they could think of to do on that bright summer day. After making sure not to get permission from their parents, both kids made their way down the block, across the street, and through the forest of half-dead trees to the house. They both knew it was called the Harker house, but had no idea why. One time, Jimmy had asked his mom if she knew the answer, only to find her just in the dark about its origins as he was himself. Leo said his grandmother told him once, but he'd forgotten the answer. Jimmy knew this was most likely another one of Leo's unending lies. He did it to make himself the center of attention. A plot that worked all too well, but not in the way he had intended. In fact, most kids didn't care much for hanging out with him. Jimmy was most likely his only friend. The boys had shared a passion for all things creepy, so Jimmy overlooked his friend's near-fatal flaw. And as it turned out, it was a good thing for Leo. If it hadn't been for Jimmy, the three bank robbers who were using the house as a hideout would most likely have killed him. Well, it wasn't just Jimmy. The blue fire had a little hand in things as well. They should have known upon entering the house that things weren't right. Usually the place was silent silent. But this time, after they squeezed themselves through the broken window which led into the basement, both Jimmy and Leo swore they could hear murmurs from upstairs. It didn't seem otherworldly, as Leo put it, a word that he heard from some ghost hunting show and decided to use at least twice a day for at least 2 weeks. It was like talking. Regular talking, like from people. They looked at each other, a nervous energy passing between them. Nobody moved at first, but Leo proved more than able at shrugging off his fear. He inched his way to the bottom of the staircase, the darkness folding over him after only a few steps. Jimmy could no longer see his friend. Now, normally, Jimbo wouldn't have, thought twice before following right after, but this time, not even a zoo full of wild animals could have done the job. He was about to whisper into the shadows in the hopes of bringing Leo back, but that was before the door at the top of the stairs opened to reveal the shadow. Leo screamed in a voice shrill enough to shatter glass. Jimmy stumbled back in reaction to the scream, as well as the now approaching shadow. He tumbled out of the minuscule patch of light cast from outside the broken window and behind a scattered pile of decrepit furniture. His head landed against something hard. For a minute, he was overcome with pain, and when he finally recovered, it was just in time to see his friend dragged, kicking and screaming through the open door. Jimmy felt as if time had stopped as he watched the door slam shut behind them, and even after it was done, it took Jimmy a few moments to comprehend the series of events. Someone or something had Leo, and there was nothing he could do about it. Nothing except run for help. Jack never went very far as a scientist. His skills, as it turned out, were best used as a teacher. He always liked small towns, so when he was offered the job as a middle school science teacher in the tiny town of Centaur, he decided to take it. Besides, he hadn't worked for a few months and was clearly out of options. Well, he told himself, there would still be time for his side experiments, and one day, maybe one of them would pay off. In the meantime, he would now be known as Mr. Knapp. It was funny to hear this name from the kids, or just about anyone else in the town for that matter, but he didn't mind too much. Truth be told, he liked teaching, liked it a lot. But every so often, he would lock himself in his basement, notes in hand, and a couple of test tubes in the other, see what he could cook up. His neighbors from 2 houses over told the fire department they could hear the explosion clear as day. It was a miracle he lived through it, everyone thought, and without much of anything to show for it. He told the firemen, and by extension the rest of the town, that he was taking a bath when it happened. This got more than its share of odd glances, but it was easy enough to swallow, they supposed. After all, Weren't most science types absent-minded? Eventually, it all blew over, well, no pun intended, and Jack was back to his usual routine of grading papers and parent-teacher conferences. There was one problem, one that Jack couldn't tell anyone. Something had happened to him, something unusual, and he had no idea what to do about it. In fact, he was deep in thought on the problem when he found himself colliding with Jimmy Preston just outside his house. Jimmy hadn't struck Jack that hard, despite his speed. To Jack, it appeared as if he was mostly run out at that time, but even so, Jimmy bounced off him like a rubber ball before collapsing onto the street. Jack was on his knees in a flash. He eased the boy into a sitting position in order to help him catch his breath. Jimmy panted for several minutes before he could even look at Jack. Mr. Knapp. It's okay, Jimmy. Just take it easy. Looks like you about ran yourself out of your skin. Jack's words went unheard. Jimmy was too busy recalling his tale of himself, Leo, and the unknown figure met behind the walls of the Harker house. And after he was done, Jimmy had just enough energy left to begin crying. Jimmy, it's okay. I'll just call the sheriff. We gotta find him. He's gotta help Leo. It might kill Leo. To his dying day, many years hence, Jack had no clue how the idea had come to him. It wasn't something he considered even in the wildest, most reckless part of his mind. But there it was, and out it came. Jimmy, listen to me. Jack handed his keys to the boy. Go inside, call the sheriff, tell him to meet me at the house. But Mr. Knapp, you can't. I'll be okay. Just go and call the sheriff. Jimmy gave Jack one final look of concern before he made his way into the house. The door closed behind him. In an instant, Jack was in his car and on his way to the Harker home. It would only take a few minutes, he thought, as he pulled down his tie. But even then, it might not be enough. He was just about to tear away his shirt as he rounded the corner which led into the forest of half-dead trees. I don't kidnap people! Carl paced back and forth like he was trying to keep from urinating himself. And I really don't kill kids. He stopped, looked Roger in the eye, then resumed pacing. Yeah, I don't make a habit of it myself. Well, now it was Peter's turn. He was the tallest of the three, but also the largest. I like to eat, he would often tell people. Can't we just leave him here tied up? Roger, who now stood between the two, closed his eyes. He took a couple of slow breaths and turned to Peter. Sure, why not? That way, if nobody finds him, he can just starve to death. Much better than what we can give him. The sound echoed from the floor below, like a whoosh of air. No, not air. Fire. Something was being set on fire. The three men must have thought the same thing as all of them snapped to attention and made for the door. There's a fire, Carl's voice boomed. We're on fire! Peter turned on Carl, his hand going for his gun. His patience with him was at it. The boy! Roberts froze. The voice was from right outside the door, but that wasn't the most shocking thing about it. That honor belonged to its tone, like somebody or something growling. The three men backed away from the door. Carl and Roger both went for the guns, but they never had the chance to use them. As the door burst open, the blue light fell over them with all the intensity of a small sun. They tried to shield themselves from the worst of it, leaving them temporarily defenseless. And that's when it struck. The light, still burning a dim blue, ricocheted back and forth between them. It was like something was hitting him over and over, but it was just a light. It was moving too fast to be anything else. Peter collapsed first. Blood ran from his shattered nose. He was screaming, his hands clamped down over his face. He tried to stand, only to find himself forced back down. "Peter!" Carl screamed. He went for his gun. The light had diminished slightly, as if, upon focusing on Peter, it lost some of its intensity. But as he drew the weapon from his belt, the light returned to its former luster, and now he was headed for him. He fired his gun. It was a pathetic shot, done more out of fear than an attempt to defend himself, but it was enough to give the light pause. Carl couldn't take his eyes away. It was a man wrapped in a blue fire. He couldn't see his face, but that was the least of Peter's concerns. He dropped his gun, still staring. And then, he later told the cops, the flaming man smiled. And then all went black. Not for the man inside the blue fire. For Peter, he was no longer conscious. Roger was out the door and about to descend the staircase when he stopped to look over his shoulder. It was a mistake. The flame was on him in a second. He was slammed against the wall twice, then released. He plummeted to the bottom step. The flame washed over him, hung for a moment, then shot out through the open door. Man, Roger thought. It was a man. But that's all he had time for, as no more than a second later, the sheriff and his deputies rushed inside, guns drawn. It didn't take them long to clean up. They found Leo in one of the upstairs bathrooms, bound and gagged. He was scared, but perhaps a little bit excited as well. Finally, he had a story that wasn't a load of BS. Only 2 of the robbers were still conscious, and despite them being read their rights, only one of them wouldn't shut up about how they got their ass kicked by some kind of blue fire ghost. Understandably, the sheriff ordered a series of drug tests. Jack watched from down the street. It worked like a charm. The suit had cost him too much time and money, but all's well that ends well, he supposed. He was still wondering why the fire, or to be more precise, the low-level radiation, would make him invisible. Or, for that matter, stronger and faster. Always with the questions. That was his life, and it didn't look like it was going to change anytime soon. He opened his car door, paused. He was thinking for a moment, and he smiled. Blue Fire. Nice name.